Hey everybody, I'm Sky, and this is my military history interpretation of Star Wars. I'm going to look at the Star Wars trilogy, duology, whatever, the 6 films of Star Wars, and also including some other materials such as like various books which I've read and the Cartoon Network Clone Wars. I'm going to basically interpret the Star Wars movies and the action in a military historical fashion. So this is kind of like what you would see on the History Channel, where they would say like, all right, well this is the battles, this is the Civil War, this is the War of Independence, this is the Vietnam War, and they actually tell you about the politics and decisions and policy making stuff like that. So this is for Star Wars, and a little bit of my background is I'm a little fascinated with war. I've been studying war and history kind of like on my own, in various ways, like the Hornblower series by C.S. Lewis, like early on. What is it? I read Hardy Boys, but I don't think that relates really to anything, But I've read like some fantasy, and I've read some sci-fi, and I've read some Star Wars books as well. But also, like, there's a lot of war history, so that's kind of like why I'm interested in looking at things from that perspective. So that's why I'm going to do it with this. So let's begin with the beginning. What is the universe that Star Wars exists in? It's the Galactic Senate. Or what's the name of the government? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. But it's not the Galactic Empire by this point. The Empire occurs later, and in fact at the end of Episode 3. But it's the Senate, and what it is that, well, the Senate is kind of like this democratic, capitalistic society, in a way. There's wealth and trade, and part of that is that I think a lot of trade goes through Coruscant, as well as that's where all the representatives meet, so which makes a lot of sense. Coruscant was kind of like located about the center of the galaxy, so it's kind of like naturally just a lot of things would have to travel near it or in its in its direction to get to wherever they're going. And so it's just a natural hub for trade, and they kind of wanted that because that way you could tax it and run this government, and then you could just basically take care of things. You can keep it organized, and enough wealth is gained from the small taxation of just because you can imagine the whole planet is a city, meaning there's a lot of people, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of industry, there's a lot of trade going on everywhere. All over this planet, and it's from hundreds of civilizations and planets, which have their own things, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, that's why the whole thing's a planet, because there's the massive population that you have to deal with. Now, something else is that before that time, there was the Battle of the Sith, or the Sith Wars. And before that, so like the very beginning is that once they started developing the ability to travel between planets, that's when basically this whole sense and reality that there is life, and in fact they were all kind of connected in some way, like they were all beings that can interact with each other, and that's where like language, that's why they could communicate with each other, and they could trade with each other too. So. But at the same time, the realization that, there's this thing called the Force. And once that bit of information spread and just took over like wildfire, people realized, this is why we have, spirituality, this is why we have religion, this is why we do certain things, this is why we have faith and whatever. Because remember, the Force is always described in religious contexts, too. But all these different sects of Force users developed. And there was like one little sect was the Jedi, one little sect was the Sith. There was like other little sects, and they're kind of like religiously organized, or fostered in some way because that's how you interpreted it. But it was also like, well, what's their purpose? Why do they exist? And it's like, or like why would you master the Force? It's like there's these kind of religious organizations. They're sects. They're David Koresh, religious sect. Yeah. But anyways, you get what I'm saying. So as a result, these groups are rising up and they're organizing. And then some of them realize, hey, we could organize for conflict. And I don't think it was the Sith that did it first. So I don't know. I haven't read that much of the history of Star Wars, by the way. I understand some of the concepts, but if there is no history, that could be the history. Is that this is what happened? This is why you keep going back. So the technology wasn't quite there, but these organizations based on these religious organizations of beliefs in how to use the Force developed in the galaxy. And then one of the groups was militant, and they basically took over a lot of planets. And I think that then the Sith turned militant, because I think ideally the way it was that initially the Sith I have a speech impediment on the S, but the Sith existed as kind of a militant culture, but they weren't totally egocentric in some way, because there's always like this element in the mythology that, well, there was some good in Sith, like there was some things that Sith had to do, and it's like, so for whatever reason that's kind of how they were. But I think there's also like the Sith were assassins by nature. That's why they used the Force. It wasn't until it changed in some way, and I think you could say that it was influenced by this other Force using group that believed, hey, you use the Force for militant gain. And the Sith, because they're secretive. It's like everything they do is secretive and with stealth and machination. It's because that's how did the Empire get formed. But yeah, it's like and that's why you always have like the Master and the Apprentice. So it's like assassins. You basically train one guy. Is also part of it. And that's why it's real strong, or it would last and so strong, because you're kind of basically you're training someone and you're bringing them up in the style of a warrior kind of thing. So it's kind of a Spartan way to indoctrinate people into your religious organization. But it's very true. You could imagine that. Yeah, I mean, how did Jesus learn his religion? How did Moses learn his thing, or like how to basically practice day to day religious lifestyle? It's like, well, he had to have experience. He had to have somebody who knew how to behave teach him. And it's the same with monks. Monks go to a monastery to learn a certain lifestyle. Priests and the Tongs, or the martial arts monks in China, they go to a school and they learn a certain way of life. And if you really totally dedicate yourself to that life, you become an elite. And you're recognized as an elite. Ultimately, that's what happens with the Jedi. But so anyway, so the Sith are just constantly, or they spread out, developed all over the galaxy, and they were warring with each other. So they were doing all sorts of weird things. That is part of the history, I believe. And as a result, people were just like, oh my God, we got to get rid of these guys. And the Jedi, I believe, developed at that point. So with the Jedi, it was this idea of peace, and it's like they were a bit more democratic, and they were more like, well, we religiously believe that we should learn and use the Force, but we also religiously believe that it is our duty to guard the helpless and guard people. And also, you can imagine that it was developed. If I was like a ruling body, a president in this time of like the Holy Sith, and I have like one little planet, I had some commerce, but I just knew that it's a matter of time before these guys who are Jedi, because the Sith had armies by this point too. But I could just imagine like, hey, I need Jedi on my side, so I'm going to create. But the thing is, these Jedi are real reckless, or I mean not Jedi, but the people who use. I need people who can use the Force, because there's these other these Sith lords. They know how to use the Force, and the Fourth, if you know how to use the Force, oh my God, you just annihilate everything. Nothing can stop you. So you have to have your own guys who know how to use the Force. So you can imagine that he established the Jedi monastery kind of thing. And it's like, well, this is a refuge for people who know how to use the Force, and it's also a training center. And it's like, I'll support it. So that's how they begin. Is that it's just this little school of people who know how to use the Force, but they're religiously organized and dedicated toward this idea that, well, we're here to defend the people. That's ultimately what it is. And it's right. And it's also because remember, there's different ideas of how to use the Force that exists. And so it was just this one sort of way he could, whoever was this sovereign of this planet decided, well, that's what I need. I need guys who are benevolent, but dedicated as well, and they need to be just hyper tense warriors. Because that's when you know how to use a force,